Jack Turner never imagined his day would take such a wild turn. As a mechanic aboard a small, dilapidated space station, he spent most of his time fixing starships and avoiding trouble. His life was simple, routine, and predictable, but that was just how he liked it. That was, until the day everything changed. It started like any other day. Jack was beneath a broken freighter, his hands covered in grease and his mind focused on the task at hand. The hum of machinery filled the air, and the constant bustle of the station's corridors provided a familiar backdrop to his work. He barely noticed when a delegation of visitors entered the hangar. They were unlike any visitors he had seen before. The Threxians were tall and elegant, their long flowing robes shimmering with an otherworldly glow. Their skin was a pale, almost translucent shade of blue, and their eyes glowed with an intense, unnatural light. Jack had heard of the Threxians. Everyone had. They were an ancient and powerful species, known for their advanced technology and their political influence in the galaxy. But seeing them up close, standing in his hangar, was something else entirely. Jack Turner, one of them, spoke, its voice musical and calm. Jack looked up, wiping the sweat from his forehead. The alien's voice sounded like a melody, soothing and strange at the same time. He stood up, confused. Yes," Jack replied, brushing his hands off on his overalls. "We have come for you," the Threxian continued. Jack blinked, unsure if he heard it correctly. "For me? I'm just a mechanic. What do you want with me?" The alien delegation stood motionless for a moment, their glowing eyes fixed on him. Then one of them stepped forward, holding out an ornate scroll that seemed to shimmer in the light. "This is for you," it said, handing him the scroll. Jack hesitated for a moment, unsure if this was some elaborate prank. The way the alien looked at him, however, made it clear this wasn't a joke. Reluctantly, Jack took the scroll and unrolled it. To his surprise, the strange symbols written on it began to translate themselves in his mind. To Jack Turner, a chosen guest of the Threxian Empire, the text read, "We honor you with an invitation to our royal wedding. Your presence is required." Jack's mouth went dry. "What? A wedding?" The Threxian standing before him nodded gravely. "Indeed. You are to be the groom." Jack blinked. "The groom? What are you talking about? I'm not." Before he could protest further, the aliens closed in on him. The air around him grew heavy, and his heart began to race. "You have been selected," the alien continued, its voice steady. "There is no choice. You must come with us." Jack took a step back, his mind spinning. What kind of crazy game were these aliens playing? A groom. He was just a mechanic with no interest in politics or royalty. He had no idea what kind of mess this was, but he wanted no part of it. "Look, I think you've got the wrong guy," Jack said, holding up his hands in a gesture of refusal. "I don't know anything about your customs, and I'm definitely not interested in marrying anyone, let alone." The alien raised a hand to silence him. "It is not a request. It is an ancient tradition. You will accompany us willingly, or we will take you by force." Jack's mind raced. His thoughts were a blur of confusion and panic. He looked around the hangar, trying to come up with a plan. He could try to run, but these aliens were clearly not the kind of beings he could outrun. Their technology was far more advanced than anything on the station, and judging by the calm, assured way they spoke, they were not bluffing. "Fine," Jack said finally, his voice shaky but resigned. "I'll go, but I don't know what kind of sick joke this is. I'm just a regular guy." The Threxian nodded approvingly. "We will explain everything once we are aboard our ship." Before Jack could say another word, one of the Threxians raised a hand, and a soft, shimmering light enveloped him. The world around him seemed to shift, and within moments he was no longer standing in the hangar. Jack gasped as the hangar and the space station seemed to dissolve into nothingness. He blinked rapidly, trying to make sense of what was happening. He was no longer on the station. Instead, he stood in a sleek, glowing chamber filled with alien technology far beyond anything he had ever seen. The walls were made of smooth, reflective surfaces, and the air was thick with a strange, fragrant scent. "Welcome aboard the Severus," the Threxian who had spoken to him earlier said. "You will be our honored guest on this journey." Jack's heart raced as he looked around the ship. It was massive, its corridors stretching far beyond what his eyes could see. And though the ship was sleek and beautiful, its purpose remained a mystery to him. He had no idea where he was going, why they had chosen him, or what would happen when he reached his destination. "Where am I going?" Jack asked, still trying to wrap his head around the situation. "To the Threxian homeworld," the alien answered. "There you will fulfill your destiny as our groom." Jack swallowed hard, his mind still spinning. This was no ordinary wedding, and whatever the Threxians had planned, Jack had a sinking feeling that his life would never be the same again. Jack's head spun as he stood aboard the Threxian ship, trying to make sense of what was happening. He had been whisked away from his station, leaving behind everything he knew, his job, his life, and his sense of control. Now, as the sleek ship glided through the stars, Jack couldn't help but feel like a puppet in someone else's game. And the worst part was, he had no idea what the rules were. The Threxian delegation didn't waste any time. The moment they finished transporting him to the ship, they led him to a spacious chamber with high vaulted ceilings, filled with soft ambient light. The room was quiet, almost eerily so, with a soft hum coming from the walls. Jack's mind raced with questions. Why him? What did they want from him? But the biggest question gnawed at him. Why was he being forced to marry someone he didn't know? And then there was the biggest mystery of all, the bride. The alien that had spoken to him earlier, the one who had delivered the scroll, now stepped forward, signaling for Jack to follow. "Come," the alien said, his voice calm and measured. "You will meet your bride." Jack hesitated for a moment, still uncertain of everything. But he knew that running away wasn't an option. The Threxians had made it clear. He had no choice but to follow their path, even if that path led him into an alien wedding. They walked through the ship's corridors, the walls flickering with strange, glowing symbols. Jack couldn't help but notice how every corner of the ship seemed to be alive with energy, as if the very walls were pulsating with life. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. The futuristic technology, the serene yet unsettling atmosphere, it was all so much to process. Finally, they reached a large ornate door, unlike any door Jack had ever seen. The door was made of a dark, glossy material that seemed to shimmer in the light. It opened with a soft hiss, and Jack was led into what looked like a grand throne room. At the far end of the room stood a figure, tall and regal, draped in silver and blue robes that shimmered like liquid metal. Her long hair cascaded down her back in waves of deep purple, and her face was both beautiful and unearthly. Her eyes glowed with a faint otherworldly light, and Jack felt a strange sensation in his chest as she looked toward him. "This is Princess Liretha," the Threxian who had been guiding Jack said, bowing slightly. "She is your bride." Jack's breath caught in his throat. She was stunning, but there was something about her that felt distant. She had an air of authority, a presence that made it clear she was not someone to be crossed. Jack swallowed nervously, unsure how to approach the situation. Princess Liretha's gaze softened slightly, and she stepped forward. "Jack Turner," she said in a voice that was both melodic and commanding. "I know this is not what you expected, but I assure you, I did not choose this path willingly." Jack blinked. "You didn't choose this." He looked around the room, feeling like a fish out of water. "Then why am I here? Why me?" Liretha's eyes seemed to shimmer with a sadness Jack couldn't quite understand. "It is the will of my people. According to Threxian tradition, a royal must marry someone from outside our species to fulfill an ancient prophecy. It is said that only when the union of a Threxian and a non-Threxian takes place will the prophecy be complete, and peace will be restored to our people." Jack shook his head, still trying to make sense of it. So, you're saying I'm some kind of tool in a prophecy? The princess lowered her gaze slightly, as though ashamed. I did not want this, Jack. But as the heir to the throne, I must do what is necessary for my people. The factions of my planet are at war, and this marriage is the only way to unite them. She paused, meeting his gaze. The prophecy must be fulfilled. Without it, there will be no peace. Jack looked at her closely, seeing the weight of responsibility in her eyes. She wasn't just some royal princess playing games. She was someone trapped by the demands of her people, carrying the burden of an entire world on her shoulders. So what does that mean for me? Jack asked, his voice uncertain. I'm just a mechanic. I don't know anything about ruling a planet, or about prophecies, or any of this stuff. Liratha took a deep breath. You are a key player in this, Jack. Whether you like it or not, you are the one who must marry me to fulfill the prophecy and bring peace. But she hesitated, as though struggling with her words. I do not wish for you to be unhappy. If you agree to this union, you will not be a prisoner. I will ensure your freedom within my realm. But this is the path we must take. Jack stood still, his thoughts swirling. The idea of marrying someone he had just met, especially someone from an entirely different species, was overwhelming. But looking at Liratha, he could see the genuine concern in her eyes. She wasn't asking him for this out of selfishness or power. She was asking because her people's survival depended on it. You really don't want this, do you? Jack asked softly. Liratha shook her head. No, but sometimes we must make sacrifices for the greater good. My people are on the brink of collapse. Only through this marriage can we unite them, heal our broken world, and restore peace. Jack let out a long sigh. He had no idea what he had gotten himself into, but one thing was clear. This wasn't just some arranged marriage. This was a struggle for survival. For Liratha, for her people, and strangely enough, for him too. I don't know if I can do this, Jack muttered, his voice filled with doubt. Liratha gave him a soft, understanding smile. You don't have to do it alone, Jack. We'll figure this out together. Jack nodded slowly, unsure of what to say next. But deep down, something told him that his life was about to change forever. And there was no turning back now. The next few days felt like a blur for Jack. After meeting Princess Liratha, the reality of his situation began to sink in. He wasn't just a passenger on a Threxian ship. He was the groom in an ancient royal wedding. The weight of that responsibility sat heavily on his shoulders, and Jack found himself struggling to adjust to the bizarre customs and traditions that came with it. Liratha had made it clear that his participation was not optional. The prophecy demanded it, and there was no turning back. But what Jack hadn't realized was just how strange, overwhelming, and confusing the Threxian way of life was. The first task Jack was given was to learn the basics of Threxian culture. His guide in this strange new world was an AI named HFY, an intelligent, sarcastic hologram that seemed to appear out of nowhere whenever Jack needed it. HFY had a cold, metallic voice and a sharp sense of humor that often left Jack feeling more frustrated than enlightened. Listen, human, HFY said on their first meeting, appearing as a tall, translucent figure in the middle of Jack's room. You may be the groom, but that doesn't mean you can just waltz into the royal wedding without knowing the rules. Trust me, you don't want to embarrass yourself. Jack blinked in disbelief. What do you mean, embarrass myself? I'm just trying to survive here. HFY's glowing form flickered, and it tilted its head in a way that made Jack feel like he was being scolded. Well, that's the first thing you need to learn. On Threxian ships, we don't just survive. We thrive. So get ready for the wedding customs. If you don't follow them, there will be consequences. Consequences, Jack repeated, his voice flat. Consequence 1. You will be surrounded by alien beings that expect you to know how to communicate properly. If you mess that up, well, let's just say things might get awkward. Great, Jack muttered, rubbing his forehead. Xerix seemed to grin. Don't worry, I'll guide you. First lesson. You need to learn how to move in zero gravity while performing the ritual dance of unity. Jack blinked. Wait, what? A dance? You've got to be kidding me. Xerix raised an eyebrow. A groom who can't dance. That's the least of your worries, human. You'll also have to learn to eat our ceremonial delicacies. You know, the glowing jellyfish creatures we eat for good luck. Jellyfish, Jack exclaimed, feeling his stomach turn. No way. Oh yes, Xerix replied, voice tripping with amusement. And if you don't eat one, you'll insult the entire royal family. I suggest you prepare yourself. Over the next few days, Jack found himself attending crash courses in Phyrexian culture. He spent hours trying to master the ritual dance of unity, which involved floating in the air while moving in synchronized patterns with other Phyrexian dancers. It was harder than it sounded. Phyrexians were graceful, their movements smooth and effortless in the low gravity. But Jack, well, he was more used to fixing engines than floating through the air. After a few awkward attempts, he finally managed to avoid colliding with any of the dancers. But it wasn't pretty. He couldn't help but feel embarrassed. But Xerix was always there, offering sarcastic comments that didn't exactly help his confidence. Not bad, human. But you might want to lose the awkward flailing arms. Phyrexian culture doesn't appreciate random movements. Jack groaned. I'll never get this right. Xerix's holographic form flickered, almost as if it was shrugging. You'll manage. You don't have a choice. Beyond the dance, there were other challenges. Jack had to learn how to address the royal family properly. On Phyrexian ships, honor and respect were everything. The slightest misstep in addressing a noble could result in a serious diplomatic incident. Jack had to learn how to bow in a way that conveyed respect without being too obsequious. It felt ridiculous, but he had no choice. Then there were the meals. At first, Jack thought he might pass out when they served him the glowing jellyfish. It wriggled in his plate, its translucent skin shimmering like liquid light. He stared at it, unsure whether he should run for his life or take a bite. Luretha watched him from across the table, her gaze steady but not unkind. You must try it. The jellyfish is a symbol of unity and strength. Jack swallowed hard, his stomach turning. Right. Unity. Strength. With a deep breath, Jack picked up his fork and speared the jellyfish. The moment it touched his tongue, it sent a strange, electric pulse through his mouth, like a burst of energy. To his surprise, it wasn't as bad as he thought. In fact, it was kind of refreshing. It tasted like a mixture of salty sea air and something sweeter, a combination that Jack couldn't place. He looked up at Luretha, who was watching him with a small, approving smile. Well, she asked, her voice soft. It's not terrible, Jack admitted, trying to hide his surprise. Luretha chuckled. Good. It's just the beginning. There are many more customs to learn. Jack couldn't help but feel a little more at ease in her presence. She was kind, understanding, and seemed genuinely concerned for him. Despite everything that was happening, Jack began to realize that Luretha wasn't just some distant princess in a political game. She was a person caught in a situation just as difficult as his own. The more time Jack spent with her, the more he started to see her differently. She wasn't just a royal figurehead. She was a leader, a woman who had been forced into this marriage by duty, not choice. And though Jack had no idea what the future held, he found himself wishing that he could help her, in some way, fulfill her role. But there was still so much to learn. He had to master the customs, learn how to speak the Phyrexian language fluently, and somehow prepare for the wedding. It felt like an impossible task, but Jack wasn't the kind of man to give up. Not yet, anyway. The days stretched on, each one bringing new challenges. But as Jack learned more about Phyrexian customs, he realized one thing. He wasn't just a mechanic anymore. He was part of something much bigger than himself. something that could change the fate of an entire planet. The days turned into weeks as Jack continued his crash course in Threxian customs. His life aboard the ship was filled with dance lessons, language classes, and the constant pressure to learn everything perfectly. But through it all, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling of being completely out of place. He was just a mechanic, a regular guy who fixed things. Now, he was being asked to play the role of groom in an alien wedding that could decide the fate of an entire species. Despite the pressure, Jack began to form a strange connection with Princess Laretha. They spent more time together than he expected, learning about each other's worlds. She would explain the history of her people, their struggles, their wars. Jack watched her closely. There was a sadness in her eyes that he hadn't noticed before. It made him realize that she wasn't just a princess in an alien world. She was a person, a woman who carried the weight of her entire planet on her shoulders. It wasn't just the wedding that troubled her. It was the responsibility, the burden of leadership, and the uncertainty of whether this prophecy would even work. Before Jack could respond, Syrinx appeared with its usual flicker, interrupting the quiet moment. "Time's up, human. You've got a wedding to prepare for," Syrinx said in its usual dry tone. "No time for stargazing or deep conversations. The Threxian Council is about to make its final decision." Jack sighed. "Right. The wedding. Can't forget that." The next morning, Jack was summoned to the grand hall of the ship. The council was meeting, and he needed to present himself properly. Laretha had warned him that the Threxian elite would be observing him closely, judging every move he made. It wasn't just about following customs. It was about showing the galaxy that the Royal Union was legitimate, and that Jack was the right choice to be her partner. He stood in front of a massive mirror, dressed in the ceremonial robes Syrinx had provided for him. The outfit was made of shimmering fabric that seemed to change colors with every movement, reflecting the light in a way that made Jack feel like a complete stranger to himself. "Are you ready?" Syrinx asked, its voice sounding almost like a mockery of concern. Jack gave himself one last look in the mirror. "I don't think I'll ever be ready, but let's do this." When Jack entered the grand hall, the atmosphere was tense. The Threxian Council, a group of the most influential beings in the galaxy, sat in a large semicircle, their eyes fixed on him. Each one was an imposing figure, radiating power and authority. Their robes were even more magnificent than his, decorated with intricate symbols that glowed with an ethereal light. The room itself was vast, its walls lined with ancient artifacts and tapestries that told the history of the Threxian people. Princess Laretha stood at the center of the hall, flanked by two of her most trusted advisors. Her regal presence was undeniable, but there was a hint of nervousness in her stance. When she saw Jack, her face softened, and she gave him a small, reassuring smile. It was the first time he had seen her look vulnerable, and it made him feel less like a pawn in a political game and more like a partner. "Welcome, Jack Turner, the head of the council," a tall Threxian named Crayon said in a booming voice. His tone was both formal and commanding. "We are gathered here today to decide whether you are fit to marry Princess Laretha and fulfill the prophecy." Jack took a deep breath. His heart was pounding in his chest. He had no idea what he was supposed to say, but he knew one thing. He couldn't just stand there and let the moment pass him by. "I'm not a royal or a diplomat," Jack began, his voice a little shaky but determined. "I'm just a regular guy, a mechanic. But what I've learned during my time here is that sometimes ordinary people can do extraordinary things. I may not understand the prophecy, but I understand one thing. This marriage isn't just about politics. It's about bringing peace to your people. And if that means standing beside Princess Laretha and helping her in any way I can, then I'll do it." A heavy silence fell over the room as the council members exchanged looks. Jack wasn't sure if they were impressed or just confused, but it didn't matter. He had said what needed to be said. Laretha's eyes met his, and for a moment, the world around them seemed to fade. It was just the two of them, standing together, facing an uncertain future. And despite everything, despite the strange world, the overwhelming expectations, and the pressure of the wedding, Jack realized something. He wasn't doing this just for the prophecy or for the Threxian people. He was doing it for Laratha, for the woman who had shown him that even in the face of duty, there was room for kindness, understanding, and a future that they could shape together. Cryan cleared his throat, breaking the silence. Your words are unexpected, Jack Turner, but they show conviction. Perhaps there is more to you than we thought. He looked to the rest of the council. What say you? The council deliberated for several moments, the tension in the air thick with anticipation. Jack's palms were sweaty, his throat dry. He couldn't stop fidgeting, waiting for their decision. Finally, Cryan stood up. The council has decided. You may proceed with the wedding. Jack let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. Relief washed over him, but it was quickly replaced by an overwhelming sense of responsibility. This wasn't just a ceremony. It was the beginning of something that would shape the future of an entire species. He looked at Laratha, who gave him a small, grateful smile. This was just the beginning. The wedding was only the start of a much bigger journey, and Jack was about to learn just how deep the Threxian struggle went, and how much he and Laratha would need each other to survive it. The day of the wedding had arrived. The Threxian ship had slowed its journey to a standstill in the heart of the Threxian system, hovering in space above their homeworld. The entire ship seemed to hum with energy as preparations for the ceremony were in full swing. Jack stood in front of a grand window, staring out into the vast expanse of space, feeling both awe and dread. This wasn't just a wedding. It was the beginning of a new life, one that Jack wasn't sure he was ready for. His hands fidgeted with the delicate, shimmering fabric of the ceremonial robes that now clung to his body. He had grown used to the sensation, but today, the weight of it felt more intense, like he was being cloaked in expectations. His heart raced, and no amount of deep breaths seemed to calm his nerves. Behind him, the soft footsteps of someone entering the room caught his attention. He turned to see Princess Laratha, dressed in an elegant gown that shimmered in shades of silver and blue, the colors of her royal house. Her hair was done up in an intricate design, decorated with glowing jewels. She looked every bit the part of the regal princess, but there was something different about her today. Her expression was softer, her eyes less guarded. There was an air of uncertainty around her that Jack had never seen before. You look beautiful, Jack said, his voice betraying the nerves he was feeling. Laratha smiled, though there was a hint of sadness in her gaze. Thank you, Jack. I never imagined I would be standing here today. But sometimes, duty takes us to places we never expected. Jack stepped forward, his eyes locking onto hers. We'll get through this, right? Together. She nodded, her voice steady but quiet. Together. That's all we can do. For a moment, the weight of the entire galaxy seemed to rest on their shoulders, and Jack wondered just how much of a role he could really play in all of this. Could he truly be the man Laratha needed him to be? Could he help her fulfill this prophecy and bring peace to her people? Before he could ask more, Tyrix's hologram appeared in the corner of the room, flickering with its usual snarky attitude. Enough with the heartfelt moments, human. Time to get moving. The Threxian Council is waiting, and they won't tolerate delays. Jack sighed, but couldn't help the small smile that tugged at the corner of his lips. He had come to appreciate Tyrix's strange sense of humor, even if it often seemed to come at the most inconvenient times. Right. No more stalling, Jack said. Let's go. The two of them walked out of the room and into the grand hall, the sound of soft footsteps echoing in the quiet corridors. Jack felt like he was walking toward his future, but his feet felt like they were made of lead. He wasn't sure what the future held, but there was no turning back now. As they entered the main chamber, Jack's eyes went wide. The hall was magnificent, with towering walls of polished crystal that reflected the soft light of the candles hanging in the air. The entire room was filled with the soft hum of energy, and the air itself seemed to crackle with anticipation. A crowd of Phyrexian nobles and dignitaries were gathered, their eyes trained on the royal couple as they approached the altar. At the front of the hall stood the Phyrexian council, along with the highest-ranking members of the royal family. Cryon, the head of the council, stood in front of the altar, his imposing figure casting a shadow over the room. Princess Lyratha, Cryon's voice boomed, echoing through the hall. It is time for the prophecy to be fulfilled. And so, we shall begin. The ceremony was unlike anything Jack had ever seen. As the priest began to speak in the ancient Phyrexian tongue, Lyratha took her place beside him, her hand gently touching his arm. The air grew thick with a strange energy, and Jack could feel the weight of the moment settle in. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a binding of destinies, the merging of two worlds that had never truly understood each other. The first part of the ceremony involved a series of symbolic gestures, small rituals that had been passed down for centuries. Jack was asked to place his hand in a bowl of glowing liquid, the surface of which rippled with energy. The liquid was warm to the touch, and as soon as his skin made contact, Jack felt a pulse run through his entire body, as if the very fabric of the universe was acknowledging the moment. Then, Lyratha performed a series of gestures, each one more intricate than the last. Jack followed her lead, trying his best to replicate her movements, though he felt clumsy in comparison. But she never looked at him with impatience. Instead, she offered him small glances of encouragement. It was clear to Jack that she wasn't just doing this for the prophecy or for her people. She was doing this for them, for both of them. Finally, the last part of the ceremony came, the exchange of vows. Jack had been told that this moment would be the most important. This was where they would pledge themselves to each other, binding their fates together in front of the entire galaxy. Lyratha turned to Jack, her eyes filled with a quiet strength. I vow to honor you, Jack Turner. I will stand by you as you stand by me. Together, we will bring the peace that our people so desperately need, no matter the cost. Jack took a deep breath. He had never been one for grand speeches, but in that moment, he felt something stir inside him, a feeling that went beyond duty or obligation. I vow to stand with you, Lyratha, Jack said, his voice steady. I'm not a prince or a warrior or a diplomat. I'm just a man who believes in you. And if this marriage can bring peace to your people, then I'll do whatever it takes to make sure we succeed. As the final words of the ceremony were spoken, the room erupted in a chorus of cheers. The energy in the air was electric, and Jack could feel the weight of the moment settle over him. This was it. He had made a promise, not just to Lyratha, but to her people, to the Phyrexian world, and to himself. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time since he had stepped aboard this ship, Jack felt a sense of purpose. The Phyrexian council watched in silence, their expressions unreadable. Jack had no idea if they truly accepted him or if they were simply waiting to see how things played out. But in that moment, it didn't matter. What mattered was that he had chosen to stand by Lyratha, and she had chosen him in return. The ceremony was over, but the journey was only just beginning. The road ahead would be long and filled with challenges, but for the first time, Jack felt ready to face whatever came next. The wedding ceremony had come to an end, but the relief Jack felt was short-lived. As the final chants echoed through the grand hall and the celebratory atmosphere filled the air, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The cheers of the Phyrexian nobles sounded hollow to him, and the smiles on their faces seemed forced. It was as if the celebration was a facade, hiding something much darker underneath. Lyratha, now his wife by Phyrexian law, stood beside him, her face calm but her eyes betraying a hint of unease. The newly married couple had barely stepped away from the altar when Cryon, the head of the Phyrexian council, had approached them with his usual grave demeanor. Well, that's one obstacle out of the way, Cryon had said, his voice low. But there are still many trials ahead. Jack had no idea what he meant, But his words made Jack's stomach twist into knots. What other trials? He was starting to realize that this wedding wasn't the end of the journey. It was only the beginning. After the ceremony, Jack and Loratha were escorted to a private chamber on the ship where they could rest. The room was luxurious, decorated with tapestries and soft, glowing lights. It was quiet, too quiet. Jack had expected a moment of peace, a break from the chaos of the last few days. But all he could think about was the unease that still lingered in the air. Loratha sat down on a plush chair near the window, her posture straight but her expression distant. Jack joined her, sitting at her side. For a while, neither of them spoke. There was too much to process, too many questions, and Jack wasn't sure where to begin. Finally, Loratha broke the silence. "I'm sorry, Jack," she said quietly, her eyes not meeting his. "I know you didn't ask for any of this." Jack shook his head. "You don't have to apologize. I made a choice too. We're in this together." She sighed, her shoulders slumping. "I know, but I wish it were that simple. The prophecy, the wedding. It's not just a matter of tradition. It's a matter of survival for my people. And even though we've done our part, there's still so much we don't know." Jack frowned. "What do you mean?" Loratha turned to face him, her eyes full of concern. "There are factions within the Threxian Council who do not approve of this union. There are those who see it as a betrayal of our history, a weakening of the old ways, and they will stop at nothing to see us fail." Jack's heart sank. He hadn't realized how much danger was involved in this marriage. The stakes were higher than he thought, and it wasn't just about fulfilling some prophecy. It was about survival. Loratha continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "There are threats we can't see, Jack. Hidden enemies who will try to undermine everything we've just started. The peace we've promised. It might not come as easily as we hope." Jack reached over and took her hand in his, squeezing it gently. "We'll face them, whatever they are, together." Loratha gave him a weak smile, though her eyes were still filled with worry. "I hope you're right." Before Jack could say anything else, there was a soft knock at the door. A guard entered, his face stoic, but his eyes betraying a sense of urgency. "Your Highness, there is a situation," the guard said, bowing deeply before turning to Jack. "And for you, Mr. Turner, it concerns you as well." Jack stood up, his heart racing again. "What's going on?" The guard didn't waste any time. "There are reports of an attempted sabotage on the ship. A group of conspirators have infiltrated our ranks, and we believe they are planning something to disrupt the peace process. They know about the prophecy, and they will stop at nothing to prevent the Union from succeeding." Loratha's face went pale. Jack felt a cold chill run down his spine. Sabotage. Conspirators. This was much worse than he had thought. "Where are they now?" Jack asked, his voice firm. Despite the fear rising within him, he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let anyone harm Loratha or her people. The guard hesitated for a moment before answering. "We are tracking their movements now, but they are well hidden. It's a delicate situation, and we cannot be sure of their full plans yet. But we need to act quickly." Without wasting any more time, Loratha stood up, her face hardening. "Prepare the security team. I want every entrance sealed, every corridor secured. We can't let them get away." The guard nodded and quickly left to carry out her orders. Jack followed Loratha, his mind racing. This was no longer just a political game. This was real. People's lives were at stake, and Jack was caught in the middle of it. He had to protect Loratha, protect the ship, and do everything he could to stop these conspirators from tearing apart everything they had worked for. Loratha's voice broke through his thoughts. "Jack, I'm sorry that you're being dragged into all of this. You didn't sign up for this." Jack looked at her, his expression steady. "I don't care about what I signed up for. I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." They made their way to the control room, where a team of Threxian soldiers were already working to track the movements of the suspected conspirators. The atmosphere was tense, the air thick with the weight of the situation. Jack could sense that everyone in the room was on edge, but no one seemed to want to voice their fear. The threat was too real, too close. Laretha walked to the head of the room, her posture strong despite the concern in her eyes. "What's our status?" A soldier quickly turned to her. "We've identified a group of 5 individuals moving through the lower decks. We believe they are headed to the central reactor. If they reach it, they could cause an explosion that would tear the ship apart." Jack's blood ran cold. The central reactor. If these conspirators succeeded, the entire ship would be destroyed. And with it, any hope of bringing peace to the Threxian people. Without hesitation, Laretha turned to Jack. "We need to stop them. Now." Jack nodded, his mind racing. There was no more time for doubt. They had to act fast. He was no longer just the groom in an alien wedding. He was a man fighting for the survival of a people he barely knew, and for the future of a woman he was beginning to care for more than he could ever have imagined. The central reactor. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he sprinted through the ship's narrow metallic corridors, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He could hear Laretha behind him, her pace steady despite the urgency of the situation. They had no time to waste. The conspirators were close, and if they reached the reactor, everything would be lost. As they approached the lower decks, Jack's mind raced. How had this happened? The Threxian Council had seemed so confident that the marriage between him and Laretha would bring peace, but now, all that hope felt fragile. One group of people, hidden in the shadows, was threatening to destroy it all. And now he was caught in the middle of it, a regular guy from Earth who had no idea how to stop them. Laretha's voice broke through his thoughts. "Jack, we need to split up. I'll go ahead and find a way to lock down the reactor room. You take the side passages and see if you can cut them off." Jack nodded without hesitation. "Be careful." "You too," Laretha said, her gaze locking with his for a brief moment. Then, without another word, she turned and disappeared into the darkness ahead. Jack watched her go, feeling the weight of responsibility settle onto his shoulders. He wasn't just protecting Laretha anymore. He was protecting the future of the Threxian people. He took a sharp turn into one of the side corridors, his eyes scanning the shadows as he moved. The hallways were eerily quiet, the dim lighting casting long, distorted shadows against the walls. He had never been in this part of the ship before, and the unfamiliar surroundings only added to the tension. Every step he took felt like a risk, every corner a potential danger. Suddenly, a flicker of movement caught his eye. Jack froze, his muscles tense, his hand instinctively reaching for the weapon he had been given earlier, an energy blaster, not much different from the tools he used back home, but far more dangerous. He peered around the corner, his breath held in his chest. A figure emerged from the shadows, wearing the dark uniform of one of the conspirators. Jack's heart skipped a beat. The man was armed, and he wasn't alone. 3 others appeared, surrounding Jack in an instant. Well, one of the conspirators said with a cold smile. "The groom himself. We didn't expect you to be so eager to stop us." Jack gritted his teeth, raising the blaster slightly. He wasn't a soldier, but he knew how to defend himself. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but you're not going anywhere near that reactor." The conspirator laughed darkly. "You think you can stop us? We're far more than just a few rebels. This ship is already ours. The Threxian people don't even know the half of it." Jack's mind raced. These people weren't just some radical group. They were organized, powerful, and they had a plan. "What do you want? Why sabotage the peace?" The leader of the group sneered. "Peace? You really believe that's what they want?" "No. This wedding is a betrayal of everything the Threxian people have fought for. It's a weakening of our culture, of our future. You're nothing but a pawn in their game. A human pawn." Jack's jaw tightened. He had heard enough. He wasn't just going to let them destroy everything he and Laratha had worked for. With a quick motion, he raised his blaster and fired a warning shot at the wall next to them. The energy blast crackled, sending sparks flying. The conspirators hesitated, their eyes flickering to each other. Jack knew that hesitation was his chance. He dove to the side, firing another shot that sent the closest conspirator to the ground. The others reacted quickly, drawing their weapons, but Jack was faster. He rolled across the floor, coming up in a crouch behind a column, and fired again, disarming one of them. A fierce battle broke out in the narrow corridor. Jack moved with a focus he didn't know he had, using every skill he'd learned on Earth to stay one step ahead. He wasn't just fighting for his life. He was fighting for the future of the Threxian people, for Laratha, and for the chance to see peace realized. Suddenly, a loud explosion shook the ship, sending a wave of heat and pressure down the hallway. The walls trembled and the lights flickered. Jack's heart stopped. Had the reactor been breached? Without thinking, he bolted toward the main access point to the reactor room. He didn't look back to see how many of the conspirators were still standing. All that mattered was stopping them, and stopping them now. As he reached the entrance to the reactor room, Jack saw Laratha standing near the control panel, her back to him. She was speaking into a comm device, her voice low and urgent. "We've sealed the reactor room, but they're still trying to override the system. If we don't stop them here, the entire ship will." Laratha turned, her eyes widening in shock when she saw Jack. "Jack, what are you?" Before she could finish, there was a loud crackle of energy, and one of the conspirators burst through the door, weapon raised. Without thinking, Jack leaped forward, tackling the man to the ground. They fought fiercely, but Jack's adrenaline gave him the edge. In a matter of moments, the conspirator was disarmed, lying unconscious on the floor. Laratha quickly moved to the control panel, her fingers flying over the keys. "We've almost got it," she said, her voice tense. "I just need a few more seconds." Jack stood guard, watching the door, his blaster ready. He could hear the sound of approaching footsteps. More of the conspirators. He wasn't sure how many were left, but it didn't matter. They had to hold them off.